you, Mr. Sullivan. Please sit down. Mr. Lee will need to break at about 3 p.m.
Yes, Commissioner. Mr. Sullivan, just before the lunch break, we were talking about the WA Appendix, Gaming Machine National Standard.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about another document, which is the GWC's policy document on electronic gaming machines.
Yes.
Can we call up, please, GWC.002.00016.0035_R at page 417. Now, are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am.
And you can see this is the September 2011 version of the policy.
Yes, I see that.
And you can see from the purpose that it's to provide guidelines used by the GWC determining whether an EGM game that is not a poker machine. So it's, again, a similar subject matter as to the appendix.
Yes, could that just be blown up a little bit, please? Yes.
Can we please go to page 418? Now, some of the items that are specified here are analogous to those that we looked at before in the appendix. So there's appearance, speed of play as examples. But items 4 and 5, if I can just have those shown, please. Now, you accept that those items are different to the items that were specified in the appendix.
I understand it, yes.
And when you say as you understand it, you've dealt with this subject in your witness statement at paragraph 161. And I understand from what you've said there that you weren't, or you don't recall being aware of this statement before 2016. Is that correct? Or this policy, I should say.
I think I have a specific record of it from 2016. I think I may have been aware of it earlier, but I'm less certain as to exactly when I became aware of it.
Okay. I'll just show a document to you which may be of some assistance. That's GWC.002.0016.0126_R at page 48, please. Now, this is a letter that's from, you can see at the top there, Josh Preston, to the GWC, or actually, I beg your pardon, to the Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor. If we can take this down to the bottom of the page, please. Do you see the second last paragraph talks about the Commission's electronic gaming machine policy?
Yes, I see that.
You are the person who primarily demonstrates EGM games to the GWC, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Do you think that it's likely that if Mr. Preston knew about this policy in 2012, that he would have discussed it with you from around that time?
Yes, I suspect that's likely.
And so, again, I appreciate you don't know with certainty. It's likely that you would have known of each of those items in the policy that we just looked at a moment ago from about 2012.
I suspect that's likely. Yes.
So if we can please go back to look at item 5, which was on GWC.002.0016.0035_R at page 418. Now, the requirement here specifies that symbols are acceptable, and then there are various dot points as to what's acceptable. And the final dot point is symbols that do not appear on poker machines in other states in Australia.
Yes, I see that.
You provided, as part of an attachment to your witness statement, a spreadsheet showing approximately 70 games which appear to be both in use in Melbourne and in use in Perth, so the same supplier and the same name of the game. Is that correct?
Yes.
You would accept that, generally speaking, the games that are in use in the Melbourne casino will be spinning reel games and accordingly poker machines.
Yes.
And would you also accept that, broadly speaking, the symbols in use on those games in Melbourne are likely to be the same symbols that are in use in the variants of the games in Perth?
In the main, yes.
Accepting there might be some exceptions or some
Yes.
differences, but broadly speaking, you would accept that at least a number of those games will have the same symbols in both places. And so on its face, it appears that the games that are, or at least some of the games that are in use in the Perth casino will be operating in contravention of this requirement of the GWC's policy.
Yes, I do accept, based on that statement there, that would appear to be the case.
And again, you've likely known about this apparent breach of policy for a number of years.
Yes, I accept that.
Do you agree that when you go to present a game to the GWC, that the members are likely relying upon you to draw to their attention any aspects of the game of which they should be aware in considering whether to approve the game?
Yes, I think that's reasonable.
And in terms of the numbers of games that you present over the course of time, is it correct that you present many games in each year?
Yes, we do.
Would it be dozens of games a year?
May not be dozens, but it may be a dozen in that vicinity.
And so if it's the case that you've known about this policy perhaps around 2012, there may be over 100 games that you've presented in that time to the GWC.
That's possible, yes.
And many of those games, without knowing the exact number, many of those games may have been games that were in apparent contravention of this policy.
Yes.
Now, am I right from what I see in your witness statement around paragraph 173 that you can't recall discussing this matter with others at Crown? You haven't located any documents that deal with the matter, and you don't have any recollection of discussion between Crown Perth and the regulator about this matter?
Not specific recollections and very limited documentation, yes.
Is it fair to summarise that as being that for a number of years you've known about the policy but you've effectively ignored it?
I don't think that's my impression. My view is I suspect I became aware of the requirement, but I don't believe I considered the application of it in the way I look at it now.
Do you accept, thinking about it now, that it would have been appropriate once you became aware of the policy and realised there were potentially games in contravention of the policy, that you raised that with the regulator to determine how to proceed?
Yes, I certainly accept, having become aware of the issue, we should have sought to resolve the issue.
Can I ask you, did you not raise the issue with the regulator because of a concern that they might require you to take games out of circulation or otherwise pay the costs of having those games changed?
I can't specifically recall. I don't believe that would have been the approach. I think, if I had to speculate, and as I said, I can't specifically recall, but I suspect our view may have been when the policy came into existence, and I think I've explained some of the history in my witness statement, is the policy came into existence at a point in time. There was already a very long history of what I'd termed themed game symbols being approved within games. I don't think I necessarily appreciated at that point in time the significance of the matter, and simply thought if the Gaming and Wagering Commission had changed their historical stance relative to everything that had been approved previously, that would become apparent in our ongoing discussions. And I don't, to the best of my recollection, recall that occurring. But as I said, I do accept that it's an inconsistency that should have, once identified, been resolved and addressed. I certainly accept that.
Okay. Now, you're aware that there have been changes to the appendix and to the standards in 2019.
Yes.
We'll come back to those in detail later. But are you also aware that item 5, the item dealing with symbols, was not modified in those 2019 changes?
Yes.
Can we please call up CRW.708.002.1319? And you can see this is an email that appears to be from you to Paul Hume.
Yes.
If you go to the third paragraph, beginning with the words, "I believe historically," and I'll just let you read that paragraph to yourself.
Yes, I see that.
Now, isn't it correct that what you're saying in this paragraph is that you're noting that the independent organisations, the ATFs, who carry out tests on EGMs, that they've known about the WA appendix before, but they haven't had visibility of the policy,
Yes.
and that you say, I see no reason to change this position. So you're suggesting that the independent testing facilities should be kept in the dark about the policy existence. Isn't that what you're doing in that paragraph?
Well, I don't think that that's what I'm necessarily doing there. I think my historical, I mean, the EGM games in Western Australia have always been ATF certified and developed in accordance with to be certified against the national standard and the WA appendix. So to my mind, they've always been the defining documents as to what was required. So I think I'm simply stating a matter of historical fact that those were the key documents, and the history was we've never provided this document before, and I didn't necessarily understand that it was a requirement because they simply were not testing against the policy document.
So you're saying that it's not the case that you suggested not providing the policy to ATFs because you were concerned that if they had the policy, they would certify that the game was not consistent with the policy. You're saying that's in no way part of your thinking.
Well, I can't recall my specific thinking when I wrote the email, but I don't think that would have been my intent. I think my view would have been the policy wasn't a relevant document for them because they simply were not testing against that policy.
I'm going to ask some more questions now in some detail about those 2019 changes to the WA appendix and the policy. You address those at paragraph 200 and following of your witness statement, and you say at 204 that you thought the reason for the change was to improve quality and variety of EGN games and generate a range of commercial benefits.
Yes.
Please call up CRW.705.001.0380, and this is an email from you to Claude Moraine Paul Hume in May 2018. So that's the year before these changes were made. Now, can you see that you're talking here about potential regulatory parameters that impact upon the revenue at the casino?
Yes, I can.
And looking at the items that you specify in the second series of arrow points, game speed, bet limits, banknote acceptors, minimum RTP, would you agree that many of these things are the things that you ultimately, and when I say you, I'm talking about Crown Perth collectively, ultimately requested that the GWC consider changing in 2019?
Certainly a couple of them, yes.
Does this indicate that as early as 2018, Crown Perth was actively looking for ways to try and increase its revenues in relation to EGM usage?
Yes, certainly based on the date of this email, yes, that was the case.
Would you agree that those changes that were ultimately requested in 2019, the changes were primarily about driving revenue growth for the casino?
That was certainly a significant driver behind them, yes.
And the point that you've mentioned about the concern to have games of different quality or better quality, that itself is also wrapped up in profit because of the idea that if patrons play those games more, the casino will earn more.
Certainly there's a linkage there, I accept that.
So we'll call up then please GWC.002.0016.0269. Now this PowerPoint presentation, do you recognise this?
Yes, I do.
And were you one of the persons that presented this presentation to the GWC in March of 2019?
Yes, I was.
Please go to page 3. So in this page, in this table, you've set out, or rather the group of people who have been presenting, have set out the change in revenue over time, over various financial years, and you've shown there's been a decline in financial year 2016 from 278 million down to 263 million in financial year 18.
Yes, I say that.
Now, why did you choose financial year 2016 as the starting year from which to draw comparisons?
I can't recall the specific determination on the selection of the time period.
If we go over the page for a moment to page 4, you can see along the top there, the first arrow point, there's an explanation as to what Crown understands the declining revenue to have been attributed to.
Right.
And thinking about that now and thinking back to this presentation, does that accurately reflect your understanding as to why there had been a decline in revenue?
I assume there would have been a consistency across the two matters. Yes, I would.
Now, all of the items that you point to in those dot points, or that are pointed to in those dot points, they're not items that would respond to a change in, well, they're factors which are independent from the nature of the games of the casino, aren't they? For example, you're not suggesting that tourism would have been better, looking at that second dot point. You're not suggesting that tourism would have been better had there been different gaming standards governing the casino.
Yeah, I think for 2, not to what I would imagine was any material degree. 3, I think, has a linkage to gaming machine product, and 4 has a linkage to gaming machine product.
In terms of the first 2 items that you specify is the attribution of decline, material decline in the local economy, sustained decline in international and interstate tourism, and particularly that first one, decline in the local economy, you would accept that if there is such a decline, that the community or members of the community are likely to have less disposable income to spend on products such as gambling products.
Yes, I would accept that.
And in those circumstances, if revenues are down when the economy is down, that's to be expected.
Yes.
And it may even be appropriate that people are not spending money they can't afford to spend.
Yes, I would accept that.
The casino, as a general proposition, can't expect to increase revenues year on year regardless of economic conditions, can it?
No.
Going then back to page 4, you explain that I beg your pardon, I think it's page 3, you explain that there's a shortfall, or what you characterise as a shortfall, oh there it is, bottom of page 4, shortfall of approximately $30 million per annum.
Yes, I say that.
Can you just explain what you mean by saying it's a shortfall? You're not suggesting the casino is making a loss, are you?
I suspect, based on the comments in the brackets, that the calculation of the 30 million appears to be what the projection was from the increase in additional gaming product, presumably out to, I think it may have been 2018 was the date, relative to the FY16 position. So the comment in the bracket would appear to indicate that may be the basis for the calculation of the 30 million.
So inside the bracket, as you say, you've got this comment there about unrealised revenue increases. Is that an assertion that if there had been a different standard governing the Perth casino, there would have been growth over that time? Is that correct?
I think it may have been not due to the changes in the EGM factors, but may have been due to the projection of what the additional gaming product installation was intended to generate in terms of that forecast revenue number versus the FY16 number. I think may have been the comparative used, based on my reading of that comment.
So do you mean that Crown had estimated what it was likely to make over time as it was adding EGMs, and that the figures hadn't matched up with what actually happened?
That's my interpretation of, I think, what that's saying in the brackets.
All right. But in that case, this notion of a shortfall of $30 million, what you're really saying is that the budgets haven't done what you expected. It's not a shortfall in the sense of a loss or money being owed to anyone.
No, that's correct. It's I suspect a shortfall in a projection, not an actual loss to the business, as I think is consistent with the previous data you showed.
And in terms of the loss that you were seeing or that you explained in that table showing the decrease in revenue, you didn't put in that table any comparison with the experience that Crown had at its other gaming properties. So was the same decrease being experienced in Melbourne at this time?
I'm not sure.
Do you think that would have been a significant point to draw to the GWC's attention so as to understand whether it was perhaps economy-wide declines in gaming as opposed to something affecting Perth alone?
It may have been relevant. I wouldn't have had visibility on the Melbourne numbers, so I can't really comment on what that position would have been.
Can we go to page 6 of this document, please? So there's a discussion here about what is identified as significant commercial disadvantages between EGMs in Western Australia and machines in other places, and the game outcome. Do I understand that to be a reference to the maths that we talked about before and the spinning reel selection versus individual selection?
Yes.
And speed of play and return to player.
Yes, I see that.
And so each of those things are said to disadvantage WA in some way.
Yes.
But you don't include in this table the advantages to Western Australia, and in particular, the fact that there is no competition in Western Australia in terms of EGMs for the Crown and Perth Casino, is there?
That hasn't been detailed there, no.
Whereas in Melbourne or any other jurisdiction, typically the casinos have to compete with EGMs that are in clubs or pubs or other venues which might offer them.
Yes, I accept that competitive landscape is different. I think there are differing views on the impacts of that environment, but certainly I accept it's a different environment here. It's not a competitive environment.
So given that this is a document that's making a submission to the GWC about the unique position that the Crown Perth Casino is in, wouldn't it have been appropriate to likewise specify the unique advantages that the casino had so as to give a balanced and accurate picture to the GWC?
I think possibly that I would accept that could have been included in there.
Did you do any analysis to work out what the significance of those advantages versus disadvantages were for EGMs in Perth and poker machines in Melbourne?
In terms of the relativities of the different competitive environments?
So, for example, did you work out what the average daily earning was on an EGM in Perth versus the average daily earning on a poker machine in Melbourne?
I don't believe that comparative was done between jurisdictions.
Wouldn't that again have been an important thing to provide the GWC so it could assess whether what you were suggesting were disadvantages actually translated into disadvantages in terms of machine use and profitability?
I'm not sure whether the Gaming Commission would have considered that information of value. Possibly.
Is that something which you could now analyse to determine what the different profitability is of EGMs in Perth and EGMs or poker machines in Melbourne?
From a casino perspective only, or from a casino and a non-casino perspective?
Casino perspective only. In terms of Crown's access to its data, is that something that could be done?
Yes, certainly Crown Resorts would understand what the Melbourne position and the Perth positions are, yes.
I'm going to take you now to page 16 of this document, please. And there's a discussion here as to the estimate of what might be the consequence of these changes, were the GWC to accept them. And you can see at the top it says that there's a negligible impact in respect of gaming harm. And then you go on to say why that is, because in summary, the assertion is that games used to be much faster in Perth and that over time, on average, they've gotten slower because of the use of unpaid or bonus features.
Yes.
Now, can you just explain in a bit more detail to the commissioners what those features are and how they might change the time of a game?
Yeah, so I think if you go back in time to the early days of Perth Casino, the technology inherent within a gaming machine was far more limited than it may be today. So things like free games, jackpot features, bonus features, these are all things that would exist in modern EGM games, but would not have existed back in the very early days of the casino operating in Western Australia. So I think that is the distinction being made there in terms of the development of product over time that, assuming the 5-second parameter was put in place, I don't know whether it was put in place in 1985 or not, but if it had have been applied at that time, the paid game speed would have actually played closely to that 5 seconds. But over time, because of these other features being allowed for, the average paid game speed has extended once you allow for the inclusion of these unpaid features, such as free games, bonus jackpot features, etc.
Now, did you conduct any analysis at this time, going through the games that you had then in operation and working out what percentage of them had bonus features and what didn't? And of those that did, what length of time those bonus features actually played for?
I don't believe we did specific analysis of the length of time of individual bonus features. We did do some analysis that we referred to in the second point there about the average paid game speed generally of the 9.5 seconds, but the detail you're talking to about specific feature assessment on individual games, that wasn't a level of assessment at that time that we did know.
So the statement that there's been an increase in unpaid features, that's essentially impressionistic from your perspective or others at Crown's perspective about how the games are changing. It's not based on any empirical data, it's just your sense of it.
Certainly we did not create hard empirical data on which to base it. No, I don't believe we did.
Okay, and you said there that the 9.5 seconds, on the other hand, was based on some empirical data. And one of the documents that the PCRC has been given is a spreadsheet, and that's CRW.709.110.3995. The metadata of this document suggests that you are the author and that you created it in January 2019.
Yes.
You can see that you're showing as the author. If we can go back to the actual document now. Do you recognise this document?
Yes, I do.
And we'll start with the 5th tab across, which is EGM Play CP Total. Looking at the top on the 4th row, the suggestion seems to be that the data analysed here is from January to December of 2018. Is that right?
So could I get that blown up, please?
So row 4, I'm suggesting to
Yes,
that.
that appears to be the case.
And this analysis, was this what was carried out for the purpose of supporting the presentation to the GWC?
I can't see the calculation to the 9.5 on that tab, but
So my question's a bit more general than that.
Okay.
Was this document created for the purpose of supporting the presentation?
I believe this document holistically is the background to the 9.5 second calculation that was included in the presentation, I believe.
Okay. And if we'll just please go to the 7th tab, which is CM EGM Play Data. Is this a tab in relation to Crown Melbourne? Is this where you get your comparative figures? Or rather, is this analysis also what you depended upon for your comparative figures in the GWC presentation?
Yes, I believe there's both Melbourne references to CM being Crown Melbourne and CP being.
And again, the date range at row 4 suggests that you've looked again over that year of 2018 as your baseline.
Yes, that would appear to be the case.
We can now go to the 2nd tab, which is the EGM game speed. Now, as I understand it, the SPH, for example, at column G, these are the spins per hour of different games.
A stroke per hour.
Stroke per hour, thank you. And then we can go down to the bottom of the table, and there's games set out the entire way across. And then down the bottom we have what appears to be the summary section. Can we not have column A and B in the way, if that's possible? Thank you. Well, if we make it slightly smaller so we can bring in the average play as well. All right, so now looking at this, again, if I understand correctly, at the bottom of the document, we're in the CP total, so we're in Crown Perth figures at the moment, at the
Yes.
tab that we're looking at.
Yes,
And you've broken this up into legacy games and regular games.
yes,
And legacy games, would those be the ones that you described, or that we discussed earlier as being Keno and Draw Poker, versus regular games being the new style games?
it's possible. I'm not sure exactly how we've categorised that position.
Okay. You then work out, you then go and work out a series of averages to come up with a total time at the end of 9.4 seconds for regular games and 10 seconds for legacy games. You
Yes,
see
I
that?
see that.
And then you've averaged them to get your final play speed of 9.5 seconds.
Yes, I see that.
So you'd accept that the first thing that this document suggests is that the games that are the new style games are in fact faster than the legacy games?
Yes, I would accept that there would be a progression over time in relation to the position with historical product.
So in terms of then assessing how these games have changed over a very lengthy period of time from when the casino opened, this document suggests they've gotten quicker rather than slower.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would draw that conclusion. I think the current data that I think that's a different point to the point we were trying to make in the presentation. My recollection is the point we were making in the presentation was that some of these regulations, the 5 second, for example, was, I believe, put in place at a very early point in time. That position would have, I think we're saying, predated potentially any of the games we had operating here. I don't think the intention was to say that that 10 seconds related to the point we were making about the very old games.
The point I'm making is that this data is what appears to be the data that you analysed or that you number crunched for the purpose of the presentation. And you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
There's no other data that you number crunched for the purpose of that presentation?
No, there isn't.
Okay. So in this data, the definitive thing that we see is that legacy games are slower than regular games. So there's at least been that increase in speed over time. That's the first point. Do you accept that?
I accept that.
And the second point is...
Sorry, don't think he quite finished the answer. What we...
I accept what the numbers in the data are showing, but I am conscious of the interpretation of that data relative to the point I believe we were trying to make in the presentation to the GWC.
And on that data, or the point in the presentation you were trying to make, we saw a moment ago that there was the assertion that games have gotten slower because of the unpaid features.
Yes.
But there's nothing in this document that shows, for example, what the speed of games were on average 5 years ago, 10 years ago. There's no evidentiary basis here to say that games were faster and are now slower. Do you accept that?
I do accept that.
If we can now go back to the PowerPoint presentation, please, which is GWC 0002 0016 0269, and that's back to page 16. So there are two discrete statements there in those dot points. The first one I've just discussed with you a moment ago about what the historical speed of play was.
Yes.
And the second one is that there has been an increase because of those other features leading to this 9.5.
Yes.
But you agree as well that there's no evidence in that spreadsheet that we looked at a moment ago that would allow you to draw the second conclusion. It could, for example, have been that the average speed was 9.5 a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
I think there's probably a couple of factors at play in in that comparison of the legacy and the regular data, but I accept I don't think we've specifically done the type of time period analysis you've talked about to prove out that number. I accept that.
And given that you accept that there was no analysis, do you accept that the statements being made here to the GWC are statements that don't have a proper evidentiary foundation?
Well, I don't accept that position in relation to the calculation of the 9.5 seconds. I consider we did, a fair and reasonable amount of work in establishing that position. Do I accept the point that we didn't go back and in an evidentiary manner determine the historical position? I do accept that point, but I don't accept the point that we did not put time into putting up what I would consider a reasonable approach to the calculation of the 9.5 seconds.
And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the 9.5 seconds is not accurate for the time frame in which it's measured. But I'm noting that you say that the 9.5 seconds is a result of progressive increases in unpaid game features. That statement does not have support.
I accept we have not proven that with data. I accept that.
And above, that historically EGM games operated at the speed of play close to the minimum, there is no support for that statement either.
Except there is not data.
As a result, do you accept that the way those statements are presented suggests to the GWC that there is such data?
I don't know that it necessarily does. Do I accept it could be interpreted that way? I accept it could. I don't accept necessarily that that would be the starting expectation.
In addition to the points that we've just discussed now, isn't it also the case that not only did you not have the data in relation to the first point about the historical speed of EGMs, but you also would not have been able to obtain the data because of limitations in the way that speed of play is measured?
I think there would have been a number of reasons why we would have had challenges doing a very historic review of the data.
In short, attempts to measure game speed are inherently unreliable because what they are based on is not the actual games, but rather a session of time and the number of games happening within that time, not taking into account whether the patron is constantly playing or is taking breaks, having a drink, talking to someone, or doing something else. Isn't that correct?
I accept that there is allowance for breaks dependent upon patron behaviour within that data.
And you can't know when you view the data, you can't know what level of breaks were happening over the course of time for which the data is measured.
You cannot define that. I would agree with that.
And so you would also agree that a statement that we've seen at the first dot point, that they operated at close to minimum limit of 5 seconds, is one which is inconsistent with the measurement technique that was being adopted by Crown to try and work out speeds, because that measurement technique would have not been able to distinguish between ordinary playing time and break interrupted playing time.
I would accept that that challenge would exist in comparative data, yes.
Okay, and that's a challenge or a difficulty that you have brought to the attention of the GWC, and we can call up gwc.0002.0016.0312 at page 70. So do you recognise this document?
Yes, I believe I do.
And it's a document that attempts to show the GWC information about new games that have been introduced following the amendments to the appendix and the policy,
Yes.
at which time the appendix had been changed to allow speed of play of 3 seconds.
Yes, it appears so. Yes.
And then down the bottom, you have the caveat as to what the meaning of rated seconds is.
Yes, I see that.
And again, that's just to confirm that the casino's limitations in being able to measure speed of play are inherent in the technology available to the casino, that it will never be able to actually work out true playing time as opposed to overall session of time, overall number of games in that time.
Yes.
Did any of this get explained to the GWC in the course of that March 2019 meeting?
I don't believe the discussion would have occurred regarding rated play at the GWC meeting, because at that point in time the data was covering a holistic view of data, not specifically a rated position. I think subsequently, when a discussion was held, I believe at department level rather than at GWC level, the discussion around the provision of rated data was discussed. And I believe that's when there was a discussion about the detailed composition of rated play data and perceptions that the department had in relation to that definition of rated play.
Do you accept that the GWC appears to have not understood these limitations following the March 2019 presentation?
I'm not sure the premise for the questions established in relation to that. And certainly, without knowing what is the basis for the appearance, it's difficult for this witness to answer that question.
Just lead into it, Mr. Lee.
Are you aware that in September 2020, the GWC issued a show cause notice asking why it shouldn't revoke the changes to the appendix so as to allow for 3-second game speed?
I'm not sure I was aware of a show cause notice. I think I was aware there was some discussion about the position on rated play data, but I'm not sure about the show cause notice.
When you say you were aware of some discussion, what discussion is that?
I believe I was aware between the executives and the legal and compliance department. I think there was some commentary that I may have been involved in indicating there were some things we needed to work through on speed of play, or some issues that had arisen from memory. I can't recall exactly.
So if you were involved in some of those discussions, did you take as your impression from those discussions that the GWC had not understood these speed of play limitations as a result of the 2019 presentation?
I'm not sure that I understood the detail of exactly what the GWC's position was.
You then presented to the GWC in November 2020, didn't you? We can quote the document if you'd like to see. That's GWC.002.00016.0336_R, and at page 4. You can see 5.4 heading down the bottom, Crown Perth show cause.
Yes, I believe at a point in time we became aware there was a speed of play issue we needed to resolve. I'm not sure in my attendance I necessarily knew about the show cause, but I have a vague recollection we may have presented on an update on speed of play. So I think I became aware at a point in time that speed of play was being looked at. I'm just not specifically aware of the visibility on show cause specifically as being part of the process.
All right. So in terms of what you then presented on at this meeting, it appears that there's some discussion there about the steps that will be taken, the engaging of an independent ATF, and then having manual simulated testing of game speeds from that point. You go on to then say in your witness statement at paragraph 222 that there's ongoing correspondence between Crown Perth and the GWC in relation to this issue.
Yes.
Can you tell the Commission what is the latest position in relation to this ongoing correspondence?
So my recollection is the latest submission by Crown to the GWC, I think, was in something like mid to late April of this year. And I believe that had flowed from ongoing conversation about the speed of play analysis process with some of our manufacturers, indicating that there was potential variability in speed of play measurements. And as a result of that discussion, and I think at a point in time we put forward both a pre and a post approval testing process for the games. And I think our view was, in light of the variability the manufacturers had raised, our concern was that if we did pre-approval testing at a 3-second requirement per the revised requirement in the appendix, and we then did post-approval testing, accepting there was a degree of variability in test results, that could mean the post-testing didn't line up as being necessarily consistent with the pre-testing. So I think what was outlined in that April correspondence was saying we won't test to 3 seconds for the games, we'll test to 3.5 to try and offset that potential for inconsistency with the outcomes in the pre and post testing, allowing for the volatility. So I think that was an adjusted position put forward in the April correspondence. I don't believe the GWC has yet responded to that submission. I think Crown has taken steps to communicate that position and continue to progress it with the suppliers. So we have been receiving revised reports allowing for that 3.5 second approach. I believe we've made a submission to the GWC in relation to all of the impacted games from one of our suppliers. I had some recent correspondence from the department or a department officer in relation to that matter. I believe she indicated that she had been looking to put, or she was seeking some of the background on it because I don't believe she was familiar with the history in relation to the matter. So I think she was looking to put, trying to understand it, so I provided some explanation to her, and she was looking to put that matter to the GWC for them to consider. I think she was trying to get to last month's meeting, but indicated that wasn't possible, and she now may be looking to get to this month's meeting. And one of the elements that I explained within that was, in a recent appearance, Mr. Bossy and I had at a GWC meeting, the GWC had indicated that due to the demands of the Royal Commission, they were going to have limited capability to assess or evaluate Crown submissions, of which game submissions were one of those elements. So I indicated to the department that we had lodged a submission in relation to one of the suppliers' list of games, but that subsequent to that submission, we hadn't continued to lodge submissions for consideration by the GWC in light of their request or their indication they weren't in a position to consider for a period of time. So I indicated to her, I believe, that if the Commission's view was they would like us to continue to put those submissions in for assessment, that we could do that, and if she could get clarification on that from the submission that she made, then we could comply with that as required by the GWC.
And just out of that answer that you gave, I didn't want to interrupt, but I'm not quite sure I understand the point that you made about testing to 3.5 seconds. Are you saying that you've asked the ATFs to confirm that none of the games are faster than 3.5 seconds? Is that the point?
So what we're saying was, rather than directing the manufacturers to develop games to the 3-second requirement, consistent with what was detailed in the WA appendix, in light of the potential for variability in pre-testing and post-testing results, we suggested if you develop the game to a 3.5 second level, then even allowing for the volatility, it should still fall above 3 seconds.
Okay.
So that was the thinking behind trying to minimise the chance of the process not producing consistent results as we rolled through the implementation.
So you're essentially asking manufacturers to develop to a slightly longer game speed so as to give you a buffer in
Yes.
case there was unexpected performance.
Yes.
And is that intending then, or is it the expectation that the games will therefore overall, on average, be 5 seconds or longer speed of play, or that they'll overall on average be 3 seconds or longer speed of play?
So they would obviously have to meet the minimum 5 second requirement, and if the view was at the 3 second speed of play they were going to meet the 5, then by extension, if you were developing to 3.5, you would expect them to get to 5.5. But I think we're still understanding as this process is developed and implemented exactly how that plays out. But certainly the expectation of it was that they would we achieve an outcome that would mean we consistently meet the requirements of the GWC regarding each of the 3 second and 5 second requirements for those games.
Right. If we can now please bring back up the PowerPoint presentation at GWC 0002 0016 0269. And again, please go to page 16. So that first dot point at the top where it says that average speed of paid EGM games expected to remain above 5 seconds, what was the basis for the expectation?
I think the comparative analysis we did to Melbourne was our basis for expecting that on the basis of their environment and the result we calculated for Melbourne, that would should produce a result of above 5 seconds for Perth in light of our consideration of the relative parameters in Melbourne.
If we can please now bring up CRW.709.154.2161. And this is an email between, or from you to Mr. Murray and Mr. Paul Hume.
Yes.
And if we can please go down to, well, first of all, you see the date is 21 March 2019. And if we can please now go down the page, where there's a comment about slide 12.
Yes, I see that.
And that comment explains why the word expected is used in the slide,
Yes.
because you recognised that there was a risk of not achieving speeds above 5 seconds.
Yes, I accept that.
Did you articulate to the GWC in the course of the presentation that there was such a risk?
I don't believe we did, but I don't believe our proposal at that point in time was based upon applying a 5 second requirement to the 3 second. I believe the position we put forward as our proposal was to adjust the minimum speed of play requirement to 3 seconds. At that point in time, we were not anticipating the requirement to also apply a 5 second requirement to that 3 second requirement.
But you were the party that suggested that 5 seconds would still be achieved. It's not as if the GWC put in a requirement that you had not articulated in your slide, or a figure that you had not articulated in the slide.
Well, I think what we put forward was we were saying our proposal was to move from a 5 second minimum speed of play to a 3 second minimum speed of play. I think we then indicated that we expected that would still achieve a 5 second outcome. But I think what I was trying to say here is I don't want to be saying we're going to guarantee a 5 second outcome, because I'm not sure that we can actually do that. I think that was my thinking behind what I was saying.
Okay. If we can now please move to CRW.708.002.1297. And you can see from the top of the email, this is from you again to Mr. Murray and Mr. Hume,
Yes.
and you discussing here that you've got a Excel spreadsheet which sets out your assumptions as to the commercial impact that may result from the changes.
Yes, I see that.
If we can please call up that spreadsheet, CRW.708.002.1298. Okay, so looking at this first tab under scenarios, you can see that scenario 2 at row 20 is approval to change game speed and game math,
Yes, I see that.
and that's effectively what ultimately was allowed by the GWC, isn't it?
As I said, I don't think the game speed adjustment was ultimately what we had proposed, but was a partial change. The game math change was I believe, approved as proposed.
Okay, and that's scenario 2. So if we can please go to the scenario 2 tab. And you can see here there is some estimates in terms of what you think might be revenue changes. And at row 29, there's an estimate revenue increase for game speed change only. And I hear your point that it's not quite the game speed you're accepting. But nonetheless, you had an estimate based on the 3-second of an $18.5 million increase in revenues.
Sorry, could the size of that just be increased? Yes, I see that.
And then at row 30, you had another increase assumption based on the game math change of 7.95 million.
Yes, I see that.
And there's a note to the side there explaining where these figures come from as per scenario 5 and 6. So if we can please go to scenario 5 now. And you can see that at row 18, you're estimating an increase in revenue based on current players of 5%, and that's equivalent to $13 odd million for current local players.
Yes.
And then if we can go to scenario 6, there's a similar estimate that the $7 million, $7.95 million will come from current players at row 23.
Yes, I see that.
At row 6, there is discussion about Crown Perth gaining access to a full spinning reel game library. What does that mean?
So essentially the winning combinations restrictions that had been in place created material restrictions on the type of products that could be converted into a manner that would be acceptable for approval in Western Australia. So whereas previously under the regulations prior to the September 19 change, there was a portion of games that would never be convertible to be compatible for operation in Western Australia. Post that change, an increased amount of that library opened up in terms of availability for use in the market.
In simple terms, you could get existing spinning reel games, poker machine games, and you could change the visual appearance of them and offer them in the Perth casino.
Yes, subject to meeting the ongoing requirements of the WA Appendix, then games that met those requirements could be approved in Western Australia.
But the same internals of the game, the same random number generator, the same maths, the same pay tables, all of the operational aspects of the game would essentially be unchanged.
Yes.
So in terms then of the total amount of money that we've seen in those two figures, the $7 million and the previous, which I think was $18.5 million, adding those together, you're estimating that something in the order of $21 million was going to be additionally paid by local patrons at the casino each year moving forward. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that I think there was a degree of scaling to that figure. I think that figure was the basis of a full implementation, so I think there may have been some phasing to get there. But the numbers are based on the full implementation, so it might have been half of that for a couple of years to implement to a position, but the view was then that that might be the sort of quantum of the number once you got to the full rollout.
Okay, so over time, you might get to the stage where you'd be looking at ballpark $20 million additional being paid by local gamblers. What analysis, if any, did you do to determine whether local gamblers could afford an extra $20 million a year?
Yeah, I don't know. I was performing some of the product and financial elements of the presentation in relation to what reviews were done on the RSG side. I don't know what occurred in those elements of the review or the presentation.
Did you at any stage speak to anyone in the RSG team to seek their advice or comments as to the proposals?
No, I didn't.
Are you aware of whether anyone else in the team that was considering this spoke to RSG people to seek their view as to the implementation of this project?
I'm not specifically aware, no.
When you say you're not specifically aware, are you aware in a general sense?
No, I know there was discussion about RG in relation to the proposal, but exactly what engagement occurred with the RSG team, I didn't do that. Whether others did, I don't know.
Let me ask the question this way. Do you have any reason to believe that anyone did speak to the RSG team?
Well, I think with respect, witness can only answer for himself. That seems to be a question about whether he knows whether anyone else had communications with the RSG team.
There was slight differences in the answer, so it might be well to clarify it, I think.
So the question I'm asking you now is whether you are aware of any person in the team that was considering these changes to the appendix and the policy. If you're aware of whether any of those persons spoke to the members of the RSG team or sought advice from the RSG team as to these changes.
I'm not aware of any conversation, no.
Going back to the point that we had a moment ago as to the access to the spinning reel library and being able to use machines that were essentially poker machines in other states,
Yes.
and now being able to use them here in Perth with some modifications to the way that they displayed the revealing of the numbers that have been generated.
Yes.
Is there any difference now between the machines that are allowed under the amended appendix and policy and spinning wheel machines in other jurisdictions, other than the appearance by which the result is revealed?
Yes, well, the other differences that are retained within the WA appendix that would be relevant to other jurisdictions.
And so that includes things like RTP.
RTP, separate play button, win truncation in certain jurisdictions. So whatever's retained within the WA appendix, dependent upon the regulation you're comparing to, could be a distinguishing element between a West Australian product and a product in another jurisdiction.
Now I'm going to ask some questions about the apparent impact of these changes.
Could we take a break?
Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll just take 10 minutes. So we'll come back shortly after 10 past.
All rise. rise.
Please sit down. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Sullivan, you explain at paragraph 232 of your witness statement that you've been doing some tracking of the financial performance of museum games that have been approved pursuant to the modified appendix and policy, and you've given a spreadsheet as part of your witness statement to explain that. Can I please have up CRW.700.060.1578, and I understand that's subject to a non-publication order, so please only on Council's monitors. Do you recognise this document?
Yes, I do.
Do I understand correctly that the way this document works is the first page is a summary page, and then the other pages as you go through show analysis of individual games that is then summarised to the first page?
That's correct.
And what it's showing is the average earn per new games versus old games in different sections of the casino.
Yes, it is.
And you're calculating the earnings by reference to the theoretical wins per month at TWPM.
Theoretical wins per machine.
Per machine, thank you. And the reason you're making it as a theoretical calculation is because it doesn't really matter whether people are actually lucky enough to win. What you're interested in is the amount of games they're playing, because that's a better predictor as to the long-term revenue the casino will make.
Yes, it takes out the volatility of actual returns. Yes.
And so looking down under the column that's got average TWPM percentage, and you've got different percentages at different places.
Yes.
I understand that each of those percentages show the increase in winnings for machines that have been approved under the amendments versus the machines that were previously approved. Is that correct? And so the total, the grand total you have down the bottom there of 166%, that's the average across all machines in the casino at the moment.
Yes.
Sorry, where is that? Oh,
So-
yes, I can see it, yes.
And certain rooms, excuse me, have a significantly higher difference in earnings. So looking at the Pearl Room, at the suite at the top there,
Yes.
that's 261% increase.
Yes.
And then that's calculated by reference to the two figures to its left, $1,500 per machine and $583 per machine. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Can you explain the meaning of the quartiles on the right-hand side of the spreadsheet?
So it's essentially breaking the machines into quartiles, being the bottom 25%, mid 25%, upper 25%, and then most upper 25%. And basically what it's shading in yellow is showing in each of those room locations the average performance of the new product, which quartile of performance it sits within. So it's saying it's generally speaking in the top half of performance mixed across the top quartile and the second quartile.
And in terms then of the way this is broken down, is it right that the first... one moment, Commissioner. I've just been reminded that I need to be careful about my reference to figures in this document. Looking at the first series of areas
Yes.
and going down to AA area, are those first ones all essentially VIP rooms or other special parts of the casino?
It varies a little bit. I can explain the interpretation of those areas if it helps.
Please do.
So the top three, the Pearl Room is the VIP facility at Perth Casino. So within that area there is the suite, which is a high-end area within the Pearl Room. Then the smoking and the non-smoking areas are general access areas within the Pearl Room, one of which allows smoking within the area. The other area has no smoking at the area. The Riverside Room is then a separate member-only room located as an extension of the main gaming floor, but it has a membership criteria which is at a sort of a mid-tier level between the main gaming floor and the Pearl Room. And then the other rooms, Baccarat, AA High Limit, EE High Limit, are areas located on the main gaming floor, but are generally higher performing areas than the remaining AA through FF areas are just various areas located across the main gaming floor.
Okay, so that AA through FF, that's just general public access?
Yes, it is.
And the differences in figures, and I won't articulate them, but you can see there's quite a range of the percentage differences across those different areas.
Yes, there is.
And again, that's essentially a snapshot of what ordinary people, to use a crude expression, are spending extra in the casino on those new machines.
Subject to a couple of considerations in relation to how the data is interpreted, but yes, it is talking to the performance of, subject to, as I said, a couple of performance considerations. That data is in relation to the main gaming floor areas.
Okay, now I counted 15 new games in this report. Is that the total number of games that have since been approved under the new appendix and policy?
That may be about right.
And in
I'm
terms,
not 100% sure, but possible.
and in terms then of the number of machines, I think that is discussed at page 34 of the spreadsheet. If we can go to that, please. You can see down the bottom of the page, there's a specification as to the number of EGMs, both new regulation and legacy.
Yes.
And that number there for new regulation, does that represent all the machines that have either been purchased or perhaps upgraded to take advantage of the amendments to the appendix and policy?
Yes, I believe it does.
Is it the intention, if you're aware, of Crown Perth over time to convert all machines to the new allowances under the amended appendix and regulation and policy, I beg your pardon?
Given a sufficient period of time, progressively the new games would be developed to the new regulations, but in my experience there's potentially for some games quite a long tail. There are some games that simply cannot get changed or converted. Those games will remain while customers still wish to play them, but over time you would imagine that older product diminishes and the newer style of product progressively flows through to a greater degree. So the new regulation number would over time increase, and I would expect the legacy number to decrease.
Okay. Now, again, bottom of the page on the right-hand side, there are some theoretical revenue figures which are articulated. And are those the totals for each of the types of games, the EGM new and the EGM legacy? The figure on the right-hand side there is the total amount they're earning per day.
The average TWPM column? Or the...
Under Theo Rev Daily Av.
Oh, apologies. Yes. In the total daily revenue for the cumulative number of machines within that category.
Yes, so of the total number of machines, that's theoretically what they are earning cumulatively per day.
Yes, it is.
And again, without saying the exact figure, you'd agree that the amount being earned by the new regulation machines is significantly higher than that by the legacy machines.
Yes, it is.
Notwithstanding that the number of machines is lower.
Yes, correct.
Now, looking at that daily difference and calculating that across the course of the year, again, I'm not going to say the figure, but you recall that when you presented to the GWC, Crown's suggestion was that there was a $30 million shortfall. If that figure was taken into account, and if you worked on the assumption that that does hold true every day, that the earnings in those two different columns, that holds true throughout the year, and you also accept that that is not the entirety of the converted machines to what they might make use of in future. Would you accept that? I'm not quite sure how to put this to you. Are these figures in line with what you expected?
I don't think we've actually done a post-analysis back to what was presented to determine whether they're aligned to what we expected. But there's a couple of factors in there that I think need to be considered in the interpretation of that data. I understand the theory of the calculation you're putting forward, but I'm not necessarily of the view that that is the appropriate way to analyse the data, in my opinion.
What information would you like to give the commissioners as to what other factors they should be taking into account when they're considering this sort of information?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 points I would make. One is our view is that the COVID issue, predominantly the border closure in Western Australia, seems to have had a material impact on the gaming machine business in Western Australia. That is one of the factors that I believe has had some effect on what we would consider a normal trading period. The other factor...
Sorry, when you say material impact, what do you mean? Increased it, decreased it?
Yeah,
changed
so the fact that the border's been closed, our impression would be there's been a lot of West Australians who normally would have gone interstate or overseas to travel, have holidays, etc., and that what appears to have happened is their disposable income hasn't been spent on those things, and for those that were casino customers, that potentially a portion of that money they would have normally spent travelling overseas may be flowing through as increased spend to a degree within the casino.
Thank you.
And when you say that that's the understanding that you have, what's that based on? What's the source of that understanding?
It's not in my opinion, it's not a definitive matter that we can prove. The reality, I think, is until the hard border stops, it's only really at that point we'll actually be able to determine whether what we think is the case is actually true or not.
So that's not based on, for example, a consultant doing analysis. That's your best guess at this stage as to what is the source of the increase in earnings?
Yes, not just me personally. I think the view of people within the Crown business that have, I think, a degree of understanding of that business is our perception on what the shift has been related to, but as I said, it can't be proven. The other factor within the data as well that I just want to raise for consideration and interpretation of the data is, as a general matter of course, new product will outperform older product. So I accept the number on the front page, the 166%, looks like a very big increase, but at different points in time, whenever you're comparing new product against old product, the dynamic of product performance is such that you would always expect that new product performance number to be higher than the old number. Now, again, I can't give you a definitive view on exactly what the position would be if we hadn't have had the changes. That would be incredibly difficult to do, but certainly as a general principle, I think the 66% uplift that's shown on that front page, I think would be somewhat overstated relative to what the true increase is.
And do I understand correctly from what you're saying that the only way we'll be able to test that proposition is once the borders are open again? Is that the point?
Well, certainly for the COVID point, the point in relation to new product outperforming old product, that one's, I would say, impossible to prove, because unless you had old regulation versions of the same products you've just put in, so we've put them in under new regulations, the only way to really like for like prove it is put them in under old regulations and see what the difference in performance is, which clearly is not going to happen. So there are some complexities, but certainly I appreciate we can't fully validate what that variation would be.
And the next thing to ask you about is some of the testing that you've done of these games in relation to their speed, and that's CRW.700.060.1615. All right, and if you can just explain to the Commission what these figures are representing, and in particular why some games have got a first hour section and a second hour section, but other games only have a first hour section.
My recollection of the data was this was some interim data we were seeking to produce while we were awaiting BMM completing their review to come back to us with a testing procedure approach. So we picked from a recollection one EGM game from each of our key suppliers, which is the reason for the 6 different games. We tested each of the games for 1 hour to get a sense of what roughly the number would look like. I think based upon the 1 hour figure, it appeared the Royal Diamonds game may take a significantly longer period to normalise, and we also had a question on that. I might come back to provide some further commentary on that. The second and third games, the Lightning Link game and the Bubble Blast game, appeared to normalise above a 5-second average fairly quickly. The bottom 3 games appeared somewhat below, and for those ones we thought it was worthwhile doing a second hour test to see what the impact of that was, whether it meant an increase or a decrease in speed. Ultimately, I think it produced a slight increase in speed for 2 of the games, not much for the other. I think as we were doing this testing as well, I think we were conscious that we weren't really going to be able to replicate the position that an ATF may in relation to what they were doing, but it was a way to try and get a quick sense of what the numbers might look like while we were waiting for that. In relation to the first game as well, the Royal Diamonds game, I think we thought that was unusual that was lower than some of the others, and I think that may have prompted a conversation with the supplier of that game to understand why that game may look lower. And I think as a result of that discussion, we became aware that different accredited testing facilities were applying a different methodology to how they test the speed of play, which we hadn't necessarily previously contemplated. And so I think in a latter submission in relation to the speed of play process, I believe what we've suggested to the GWC is to actually regulate and stipulate exactly what the required process is to ensure that all ATFs will be testing to a like process, so we don't potentially have variability in terms of how that is implemented.
In terms of these figures, they're the result of your own internal testing. It's not an ATF that's generated these figures for you?
No, that's correct.
And in terms of the methodology, just so the commissioners understand, was it simply a case of getting a person in front of a machine and playing as fast as they could, or was it a case of a person trying to emulate what might be a normal person playing? How was this done?
And I believe it was playing as fast as you could, yes.
Okay.
So that was playing as fast as you could on a machine that was set for a minimum speed of play of 3 seconds.
That's correct, yes.
And have you done that same process with a minimum speed of 5 seconds?
No, I don't believe so.
The last question I wanted to ask you, or last series of questions to ask you very briefly, just in relation to some of the changes that are happening or that have happened recently at Crown Perth Casino. One of the changes that this Commission's been informed about is that there is now a limit on gambling per day for domestic patrons, and I understand that it's 12 hours a day and no more than 48 hours per week in relation to local gambling. Are you aware of those restrictions?
I think I've heard commentary either through Royal Commissions or media about changes, but I'm not specifically involved in discussions on those matters.
Now, obviously any change you would agree to those sorts of considerations would have to be properly supported by research as to what would be appropriate limits to be set.
Yes, I would imagine that's quite possible.
And then my question is, whatever the research might show, in terms of setting those limits, does Crown Perth have the technology to impose mandatory limits at particular times after persons have been playing? So if, for example, you have a rated player, you've got your rewards card, and you stick into a machine and you play for X hours, the system can then say, you've reached X hours, you must be locked out for Y hours. Is that possible?
I don't believe the system would be comprehensively able to do that simply because the player chose to play again from a pure system point of view. If the player chose to come back and play without a loyalty card, you wouldn't necessarily know who they were. Now, that said, there may have been other processes put in place with the RG team to monitor and control those issues, but from a pure system point of view, I don't think the system would be doing all the work to manage that process.
What about if the system was configured to not allow playing at all unless a player had a card identifying them to the machine?
I think that would cover some of the elements. I think I suppose it would depend then how the card worked and how you identified that the card the person was holding was whether I'm actually the holder of the card that I'm inserting. So there may be some related considerations, but I understand the concept of what you're saying.
And I appreciate your point that it might be the case that someone might use someone else's card, but from the purely technical aspect, it would be possible for a system to exist that said you can't play without a card, and that if you were playing with a card, you could then have time limits or spend limits imposed. Is that correct?
I think theoretically the concept exists. I'm not specifically aware whether our system could do that or whether systems generally have that functionality or what complexity may be involved in implementing it. But certainly in theory, there's no reason to say it couldn't happen subject to what work may be required to achieve that outcome.
And then I think earlier in your evidence, you said that there's probably no technical reason why you couldn't, for example, give access to RSG staff to information about active sessions that are happening in the casino so they could better monitor and assist patrons while they were gaming.
I wouldn't see any reason why the RSG team couldn't receive any of the information available within the Crown Resorts Group.
And I think you've previously agreed that there was no reason why you couldn't have a mandatory player activity statement in Perth analogous to what is done in Melbourne.
Not that I can think of.
And in relation then to player safe limits on spend as opposed to just on hours, again, is there any technical reason why it would not be possible to have limits imposed so that patrons couldn't spend more than some set amount, perhaps an amount that they nominated?
So a mandatory limit.
Correct.
Again, subject to the development, I don't believe there's any reason why that couldn't be the case.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any applications?
So one.
Mr. Sadler.
My name is Sadler and I act for the Gaming and Wagering Commission. It's okay, but thank you. Very kind. At paragraph 179 of your witness statement, you talk about the approvals for the EGMs, and you set out the two-stage, the in-principle and the formal approval process that you go through.
Yes.
And just to orientate you to my question, at 191 you talk about attending the GWC meetings to present the Crown presentation on your EGMs, and you talk about how they may be questions during the course of the presentation. At the end, the chair of the GWC generally asks the GWC members if they have any further questions for you.
Yes.
So in your opinion, was the GWC's approval of a new game a foregone conclusion?
No, I don't believe so.
And do you feel that your presentation, Crown's proposal to the GWC, was checked and challenged by the GWC?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Sadler. Mr.
Commissioners,
Damananda.
may I ask three questions just to clarify some of the evidence given by Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, my name is Damananda, I appear for Crown Group. You were asked questions in relation to the play button. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And it was suggested to you by Mr. Lee that in relation to subsequent games, the play button didn't really have any part to play in raising a difference between the games in Western Australia and the games in the Eastern Seaboard.
Yes.
But that assumes, does it not, that the bet and the play line stays the same?
Yes, that's correct. It assumes you're not changing your bet.
Yes. You were asked also some questions in relation to the symbols. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Lee put to you that the position in relation to Western Australia might involve the contravention of the policy. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
The policy is distinct from the appendix, is it not?
As I understand it, they're two separate documents, yes?
And when you present to the GWC the games, the symbols on the games are apparent to the GWC,
Yes, they are.
and you have in communications, or Crown in its communications to the GWC, made reference to games that are taken from the eastern seaboard.
Certainly in some presentations, I think that was referenced, yes.
What can you tell us about Lightning Link?
Yes, so I think Lightning Link may have been one that we referenced in the presentation that we made to the Gaming Wagering Commission in relation to the September 19 amendments. I think we referenced that had been a popular product in other jurisdictions, and I think we articulated that the delays in being able to access a variation of that product was one of the challenges we considered from a Crown Perth perspective.
You sought to introduce that game into Western Australia,
Yes, we did.
adopting the same symbols that were used in the eastern seaboard.
Other than in relation to the Royals, where I think I explained in my statement the approach we've taken to symbols to not use the Royals, but to use a uniquely developed set of card suit symbols. But certainly in relation to themed symbols, there has been a historical consistency with games developed for operation in other markets.
And what do you mean by the Royals, just for the sake of the transcript, Mr. Sullivan?
In a lot of spinning reel games, and I can't recall now whether they were reflected in the video we looked at earlier, but there's a standard set of symbols in a lot of spinning reel games. There's the letter A that represents an ace, a K representing a king, a Q representing a queen, and a J representing a jack, as well as possibly a couple of number symbols, but those are generally the symbol set that's referred to as the Royals, that the GWC has advised from very early on that was not a set of symbols they wished to be used in West Australian games, and as a result have not been used.
Thank you. You were also asked some questions in relation to the 9.5 seconds. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And you were taken to some materials that you prepared. You deal with this in your statement in paragraphs 2:12 and 2:13, and particularly at 2:13 you explain how you went about the analysis. Is that material in paragraphs 2:12 and 2:13 still accurate, Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, it's still accurate, subject to the correction we made at the beginning of the proceeding to remove the word rated through both of those elements, but subject to that change, yes, that's the process that was applied.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you,
Nothing
Mr.
further.
Thank you, Mr.
Commissioners.
Darman. Mr. Shaw, the practice we've adopted is for the commissioners to ask questions
Yes.
now and then you get to re-examine.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner.
But are there any other applications? If not, Commissioner Jenkins?
So, thank you. So in respect of paragraph 213, sorry, the 9.5 seconds average speed of play was for a machine programmed for a minimum speed of play of 5 seconds. Is that right?
Yes, it was games approved under that regime.
And the way that it was assessed was to use sessions of carded play, of rated play, is that right?
No, so it actually included an allowance for both rated and unrated. So it was looking at a figure based on overall play levels.
rated play portion of that
Yes.
included possible breaks in the session?
Yes, it does. Yes.
And what about the unrated
Yes.
portion?
Both would have been reflective of actual player behaviour. So yes.
Do you have an understanding of what the significance is of the Royals and why they would not be accepted by the GWC?
My understanding was just a strong historical association of those symbols for use in spinning reel games, that there was a preference that, as one of many points of distinction, that was one that was felt by the Gaming and Wagering Commission members in the early days, that that would be something, best not used in West Australian games. My guess would be as another point of distinction, but that's not based on anyone telling me that. I'd just assume that, I suppose.
Thank you. Can I ask you about your AML training? You referred in your oral evidence to having an annual refresher. I just wanted to understand what that encompassed. I want to know whether you had the same training basically annually, or whether you completed Module A 1 year, so in the second year you did Module B, and in the third year you did Module C.
My impression is it's not a modular type session. I think it would be, I think you do the session 1 year, and I think it would be broadly the same unless they did a refresh of the session itself. So occasionally what they'll do is redo the training, make adjustments to it. But I think if it was a period where they weren't actually doing a complete redo of the module, it would probably be resitting, certainly if not the same, a very similar module until they did a complete rework of it, would be my impression.
And that was online training?
Yes, I believe so.
And do you recall how long it takes you to do that each year?
I can't remember the timing for the AML one. If I had to guess, I'd suggest possibly, I think a lot of them take sort of half an hour type time would be my guess, but I'm not certain, Commissioner.
And what about for responsible service of gaming training? Did the same comments apply in respect of that it's the same module basically each year unless they do a complete
Yes, I think the
formulation?
position on the online RSG training is that fact. I think I also mentioned in my statement that I recently completed a manager training module, which I think is a recent development by Crown. So that is an additional session that's actually an in-person session for managers, which is a little bit different. But I think the online, yes, is a repeat of largely a similar session online, albeit there may be some additions and adjustments based on program to what's included in that session, I imagine.
Thank you for that. I think so. You might have answered a couple of these questions just in the final portion of Mr. Lee's examination. But you said that if a patron exceeds a play safe limit, a message is displayed on the machine that they're using, if they're presumably it's carded play?
I believe they receive a message, yes.
Right. I was going to ask, how is that displayed? So do you know?
I think we actually, I think we recorded one of the videos was of a service window device which exists on an AGM.
So I haven't seen that, but I did see in your statement there's a reference to
Yes.
a window, so I can have a look at that. It's in there, is it?
Yes, just to explain to you, just to be clear, so almost all of the EGMs operate this service window technology, which basically, if you imagined your computer screen was a gaming machine screen, basically a portion of it pops out with a display screen with a message can be displayed on. There's a slightly older version of technology that isn't actually displayed on the main game screen of the gaming machine. I think I might have explained this in my statement as well, but it's basically a small sort of LCD screen that's installed near the main gaming screen that can display similar content. So there's two slightly different versions of implementation, but either one should be able to display a form of message to the customer.
And my question is, can a patron turn that off?
The message?
Yes.
I think it only displays for a certain period of time.
So could a machine be configured so that the message could not be removed whilst that particular card was in it?
I'm not completely sure of the settings for that module of the system. I have a feeling that it may have a configurable display time, which would be, I would assume, configurable to a degree. But I think it may only provide for that message being displayed for a period of time, not to potentially, if the card was removed and went to another machine, I'm not sure whether it would re-enable that message. So I'm not 100% sure on the functionality.
I'm not suggesting re-enable it, more that could it be configured so it would stay until the card was removed? Or is it time? You seem to be implying that it's time-based.
I think it may be time-based, so there may be a maximum period of time it can be displayed for based on the configuration in the system. I suspect, but I'm not 100% sure.
And could a machine be configured so as to prevent a rated player from continuing with the session once a safe limit was reached? And I know what you said to Mr. Lee was that you couldn't stop them going from another machine to another machine, but could you actually stop them on that particular machine that they were on at the time that the safe limit was reached?
I don't believe so. My current understanding is it simply is alerting the player that they've reached their limit. I don't think there's then additional functionality to actually lock out and stop that play. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the reaching of a limit, just for your information, I think may form part of the RSG team process whereby they receive the advice of those limit settings and would look to attend when the customer hits one. I believe may be the case, but I'm not, I think I have a recollection of that in my head, but I'm not completely around their process.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Sullivan, just a couple of questions. I'm not sure whether I got the wording right for this an answer you gave to Mr. Lee, but I'll do my best. The questions were directed at analysis of the data.
Yes.
Your role in analysing the data, or I think the common phraseology these days is mining data. And what I understood you to say is that you and your team looked at that data from a product performance perspective.
Yes.
But it was a different team who looked at it from a patron or player profile
Yes.
Perspective. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Is that information that comes from the IGT Advantage system?
Both sides come from the IGT Advantage system, so the data all flows through that system. It's just that there's certain ways that I suppose my team looks at the data from a product point of view, and sort of different data set within the Advantage system that the other team looks at.
Now, I wonder if we could. I wonder if we could. I'm interested in the second team. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that second team.
Sure.
And could we bring up a document? Now, this has some names on it, but if there's a problem, Mr. Dharmananda, you'll let me know.
Yes.
CRW.700.002.0290. Oh, it may not be on the system. Could could I show the witness a hard copy? It's the document which
It's
is,
there.
it is, oh, it is there.
Well done.
Now you can see in the middle column,
Yes.
or at least slightly to the left of the middle column, your name appears at the bottom of that line, James Sullivan, Gaming Product Manager.
Yes.
Now, where would I find this second team to which you referred?
So the other team, sorry, could we just increase the size of that slightly? Yeah, so the second team, if you go right over to the right under Mr. Nick Emery, the Chief Marketing Officer, there's a lady named there in the middle position, Group GM Marketing, Financial and Planning. It's that role, the Group GM Marketing, Finance and Planning, that does that team does the analysis on the patron side of the data.
And what is in essence, to the best of your understanding, what is the type of information that they are mining?
So whereas my team would be looking at, for example, what the individual performance was of each individual machine on the floor, what games are doing, etc., they would be looking at it from a customer point of view. So they might be looking at, say, the different tiers of the loyalty club, what dynamics you're seeing in the different loyalty club tiers at the VIP, and they may be looking more individually at customers, different groups of customers. So they would be looking at predominantly looking at that rating data we talked about, where the information is linked to an individual player, and they would be looking at that data to see what offers they may be able to send to those customers of the loyalty club.
So from what you've just said, it seems to be more of a marketing function, is that right?
That's correct. It does sit within the marketing stream, yes.
Does anyone, to your knowledge, analyse or mine the data for information that might be relevant to an assessment of the responsible gaming activities?
I don't know the historical position, Commissioner, but I think I mentioned in my witness statement as well, I was invited to attend a recent meeting with the member of the marketing team I identified here and some other people, including the General Manager of Responsible Gaming at Crown Perth, involving a discussion about data opportunities in the RG space, which I think had flowed from some work that had been occurring at Crown Melbourne, looking at similar types of issues. So I don't know the background on the work that had been done previously. That was my first involvement in a couple of those meetings over the last month or two. But there appears to be some work going on in that space, albeit, as I said, I don't understand the full history to the position.
All right, thank you. Now, a different topic. Also, in response to questions from Mr. Lee, you commented on the cultural difference between Crown Perth and Crown Melbourne.
Yes.
And I appreciate that you said it's a matter of impression.
Yes.
I appreciate that. But what I would like to ask you is, when you made that comment that you saw the culture in Melbourne as being more aggressive and financially driven, is that impression, your impression, derived from any particular events or discussions, or is it simply a matter of impression overall?
I think it's probably a mix of interactions with certain people over the years, probably also comments made from other people regarding interactions they've had with other people in Melbourne. I think would generally, be a general impression within the business that there is a little bit of a different dynamic in the Perth business and the Melbourne business, but it's probably informed by some interactions I've had, some comments I've heard from others that seem to be consistent with some of my impressions. That would generally be, I suppose, where I've sourced it from myself and others who have made similar comments.
And as the organisation moved from, I think, roughly 2017 into more of a group services model, did that change? Did that in any way add to or the information upon which you formed that impression, or has it been gained over a longer period?
I think I gained the view over a longer period of time. I think perhaps it may have become more relevant to certain people when the group function existed, because a lot of the group roles happen to be Melbourne-based rather than Perth-based, not exclusively, but probably a higher portion. So I think people in Perth who perhaps hadn't dealt with the Melbourne business as much probably started to notice that difference where they maybe previously hadn't been exposed to it.
All right, thank you. Now, and my last area is to ask you, come back to this question of poker machines.
Yes.
In your capacity as the head of the gaming product group, do you meet from time to time have you met from time to time over the years with colleagues? I'm not talking about Crown, but from other casinos who are doing a similar job to you?
I do certainly know some individuals at other casinos. Being in Western Australia, the degree of interaction, obviously the casino or gaming industry in WA is very isolated, obviously, but certainly I've met people over the years, so I certainly have some interaction with some people in similar roles.
Are you aware of any other jurisdiction in Australia other than Western Australia that has the prohibition on this thing called poker machines?
I'm aware, my awareness is it is unique to Western Australia, and possibly Norway, I think, had something similar for a period of time, whether they still have it. But my understanding is the only jurisdictions in the world that I'm aware of that have a spinning reel prohibition are Australia and possibly one other country, which I think may have been Norway. But whether that's still current, I'm not sure.
Well, then can I take it that other country, whether it be Norway or someone else, you haven't discussed this problem with a colleague, someone doing a similar job to you, about this issue?
From that jurisdiction? No, I haven't.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Anything arising, Mr. Lee?
No, thank you, Commissioner.
All right, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Commissioner. Only two questions, if I may. Mr. Sullivan, you were asked by Mr. Lee a number of questions concerning and in connection with responsible service of gaming, and clarified to Commissioner Jenkins that you've attended or participated in management training module in relation to RSG. Other than the training that you've received as part of your role, do you have any great expertise in RSG?
No, I don't have a lot of exposure. Other than the training I've done, I really have very little exposure to the RSG functions of the business.
Thank you. And the only other question I have, there were questions about losses disguised as wins. This isn't in relation to Crown, but I just want to ask you this, in respect of losses disguised as wins. Are you aware in Lottery West that it's possible to have buy a ticket for $24 to receive $8 in return and to be described as a winner?
I'm not specifically aware of the detail of Lottery West's operations, no.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw.
That question come from personal experience.
Yes, Commissioner, it did. I was interested in why I was sometimes got an $8 and was called a winner.
Mr. Sullivan, thank you very much for your evidence. It has been of great help to us. There may be some matters to clarify, so the summons will be left in place, but you are free to go, and thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Commissioner.
we'll resume at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
All rise.